everyone, my name is Sarah and this is my service dog Bailey. You can see part of her right here, having her nap. And today I just want to have an open letter to professors about designing an accessible classroom, because it's not easy to be disabled and in college. It's not, an easy thing to do. It's very difficult to make it work and to figure things out. And sometimes policies are really helpful, and sometimes policies make it extremely difficult, bordering on discriminating against students with disabilities. And so if you're a teacher and you have your own classroom, this is really important for you to consider. So first things first, as a professor, you should have some sort of working relationship, or your department should have some sort of working relationship with your student disability services at your school. You should know at least what their policies are, and hopefully they have trainings that professors can attend, or they have documents online that show the best ways to have an accessible classroom. You should know the policies of your school as a whole for, sick days, missed assignments, things like that. And you should know the law for how people with disabilities should be treated and how they shouldn't be discriminated against, and how you can't, have policies that outright hurt them. If your disability services doesn't have trainings or anything like that, I really suggest that you schedule a meeting with one of them and just say, hey, I'm interested in hearing what you think I could do to make my classroom accessible for students, because most of the students you have in your class, you won't know if they have a disability. You won't know if Susie struggles with this and James struggles with this. Most disabilities you can't really see, and if you can see them, you might not know what their needs are because you don't have their experiences and you don't know what they need. So just keep that in mind. And if it takes scheduling a meeting with, a disability services officer and saying like, hey, I would just like to learn more, that is something you should 100% seek out and see if you can do. So something that's very important is the physical space that your class is being held in. A lot of professors don't have control over this. A lot of registrar's office do the scheduling of which classroom you're going to be in. And so sometimes it's out of your control. But take a look at what kind of seats you have. Do they roll? Is there a table for a person who maybe is using a wheelchair or another kind of seat that they can't remove themselves from easily or safely? Do they need that? If someone has a service animal, will they be able to place that animal underneath the seat, or will the animal have to go in between seats or in front of or behind them? Is there space in between seats for people to leave? If someone needs to take breaks during class or needs to run to the bathroom for a medical emergency, is there space for them to be able to leave safely without tripping over things? Think about these things, and if your classroom isn't accessible, then contact your disability services and ask, hey, what can I ask for this room to be changed? Can facilities come in and change the desks? I think this classroom shouldn't have this many desks. It's not accessible. What can we do? Talk to them. All of these things also impact your teaching. If there's tables, if the chairs have wheels and people can move to and from different discussion groups, if it's just plain desks, and or if it's like a lecture hall, all of these things change what you're capable of doing in a room as a professor, and if your students have disabilities. Something that's also important is if you have discussion activities or certain activities in class that require people to, one, move their desks, or two, move from a certain desk to a different area of the classroom, it's very important to consider your students who have mobility disabilities or who have a medical device that makes moving around in class difficult. Because especially when you have certain devices or tools to help with someone's disability, it's hard to, once you're settled in class, okay, I need to get up, I need to move all of my things. If you assign seats on the first day, that might be something that you tell them before they take out all their books and everything like that, because there has been several times where I'm sitting in class, I'm settled, my dog is finally under my seat, the person behind me is someone I trust who's not gonna kick her or try to pet her, and the persons to my sides aren't going to try to pet her, talk to them. And then the professor says, all right, everyone stand up, I'm going to assign seats. Not only is that difficult because I have to move all of my stuff and my assistive device and my service dog and all this, but if someone has an extreme anxiety disorder, or if they have mobility issues, or if they need, to be able to be closer, to be able to see, or to be able to focus, they're not going to be able to do that if you're assigning seats. I think one of the best methods is having students pick their own seats, and then having them fill out little cards that says if you have any seating arrangement preferences, please let me know, so that students can, without having to take time to go talk to you after class or before class, because some students aren't capable of that face-to-face interaction for whatever reason, whether it's time, whether it's anxiety, whether it's whatever. Please also consider if any activities in class require people to be standing for long periods of time, because if someone has any sort of mobility issues or blood pressure or any sort of thing, that can really aggravate it. And so consider having one or two chairs for people to sit in, or a handful of chairs for people to sit in if it's a larger class, for any activities that require standing for long periods of time, so that you're already accommodating for those people. You're already making the classroom accessible. Something that a lot of people make an assumption about is that it's the student's responsibility to make a situation accessible for themselves. While in some cases that can be true, and students should learn the self-efficacy to advocate for themselves, it's not their responsibility for living in a world that's made for the able-bodied and the able-minded. It's not their fault. And by putting the burden on people with disabilities, we're taking the burden off of society for making an accessible society. And it's just important that we have their needs in mind, and you don't want anyone to feel like they have to validate their disability to you, or they have to justify how disabled they are or what their needs are. You just want to make sure that their needs are met. Besides having an accessible physical space, you also want to have an accessible virtual space. Most schools now use online, education platforms to have quizzes on, or to put class materials on, or things like that. I suggest that anything you show in class, anything that you distribute in class, unless there is some sort of copyright issue, you upload online for those students to see. If someone has a visual or audio or any sort of disability that they are going to need to see that information in a different way or repeatedly, it's important for them to have access to that. So, for example, if your school has the option for having your lectures videotaped or recorded in any way and have that accessible to students, have that accessible to students. If it lowers your attendance, then, to be honest, your class isn't worth showing up to in person. Make your class worth showing up to. And I'll have more notes on attendance policy in a bit, but have all those materials online. If the reason you are not having materials accessible to students is because you want them to show up to class to get these things, then that's not a good enough excuse. If it was worth it to show up to class every single day, students would, unless they're sick or there's something going on. If someone needs to access that material in class while you're speaking to them, or while you're showing it, they might need text enlargening things, or they might need to see it in certain colors. Consider these things when you say, I'm not going to put that or make that easily accessible online. For most people who have some sort of disability, there will be times when that disability affects their ability to attend a class. When professors have attendance policies that state that, for every absence you lose half a letter grade, that hurts students with disabilities, and it's discrimination in a lot of ways. Students get sick. Even students without disabilities, have sick days. They have family emergencies. And I know for my school personally, Our dean's office only excuses students if it has been more than one day or something like that. So for example, I was in the hospital for a day last year, and I submitted my doctor's note, my like hospital records. I submitted them and I was like, hey, I need to be excused from the classes I missed that day. And I was not. They said, if it's, less than this amount of days, you're expected to come to an agreement with your professor about your attendance. And that leaves me completely at the will of my professors. It wasn't an excused absence, but some professors, I had counted it as them, and some were like, nope, I'm not going to take it. And I had no means of fighting that for being in the hospital for something that was related to my disability. So it is very important that when you are drafting this attendance policy, you are taking your students into account. They are people too. You have family emergencies, you get sick, you have whatever is going on in your life. You might have a disability, and that affects you. And sometimes it might affect your ability to go to work every single day. And students don't just have classes on Monday, Wednesday, Friday at the time that your class is, or Tuesday, Thursday, or whatever it is. They have classes likely every single day, and they might work on the weekends, or they might, be doing homework constantly. School is more than a 9-to-5 job. It is more time than that, and for students with disabilities, it might be even more, especially those with learning disabilities or those with processing disabilities. It's more than a 9-to-5 job, and so to expect students to constantly work and work and work and show up even when they're sick, or to figure it out, when they've been in the hospital, it's not fair. Don't rely on your university excused absence policy or whatever that is. Have a reasonable absence policy in your own classroom. There are a couple ways that I've seen professors have attendance policies that have worked okay for students with disabilities that affect their attendance. So for example, some professors have a certain amount of missed classes or attendance issues that are okay. So missing like 3 classes before it starts to affect your grade, or before, if it's a smaller class, before the professor reaches out and is like, hey, is everything okay? And makes some sort of like agreement with the person. Those work pretty well. The standard that I've seen is 3 absences without any sort of recourse. And that works for a lot of students. Some students might need more, and I would just communicate to your students that if they need more, then they should reach out to you. Some professors I've seen have had policies that rely more on, I'm not going to take attendance. If you want to show up and get the material, you can get the material that way. If you want to only use the book or talk to your friends for notes or look at the materials online, do that. But it is up to you. If you can ace the exams without showing up to class, that's your prerogative. But if you need to be in class to get the material, or if there's discussions that you get graded for or things like that, sometimes that will build the students wanting to go to class. I've always felt that it is on the professor or on the teacher to make it worth it for students to go to class. So whether that means having a discussion, or making it a time for students to ask questions, or having material that really is just built on by your lectures, then that's great. But if the students can get the same experience from reading a book, or watching a documentary or watching a video online, then why would they go to your class? And who are you to blame them for not showing up? And who are you to say that someone didn't show up for their disability versus just being bored in class? It's a student's choice whether or not to show up. So yeah, those are the main things that I want professors and teachers to understand about having, an accessible classroom. First, talk to the resources on your campus and know them. If a student needs to be referred to them, you want to be the person to help that student get to where they need to go. And you also want to know the policies and how you can make your classroom better. Second of all, consider the physical space, and any activities or discussions that you do should take that physical space and how it impacts the, abilities and disabilities of your students. Take that into account. Also, take into account students that need access to materials not in person. Something available online will allow that student to use whatever they need to do to make it most accessible to them, whether that's text to speech, or if that's enlarging text, or reviewing it before and after the lecture if they need to. It also helps them study. If the only time you're offering material is in class, that's really not fair. Listening to something once for most people isn't going to be enough to help them actually get that information. And if they're struggling with some health issues, then it's going to be even harder because they're focusing on so much at once. And last but not least, have a reasonable attendance policy that doesn't punish students for being ill, being human, or having a disability, which a lot of attendance policies do. It's just not fair to students, and it can be discriminatory. So take that into consideration and don't rely on your school's excused absence policy, because some of those are also unreasonable and not great for students with disabilities. So thank you so much. I really hope that this kind of open letter was able to at least help one person or professor or student feel heard, or to make a change that's going to impact how students with disabilities are in an accessible or inaccessible classroom. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks!